We are live. It is, what is it, Thursday, March 6th. I'm here with Jacques. Good to see you, Jacques.
It's good to see you, David, as always.
So you wrote to me earlier today and you said, hey, I think we should talk about tariffs. Over to you.
Yeah, well, we live in interesting times, but unfortunately, certainly from my perspective, everything that the governments in Canada want to do is wrong. I posted on X earlier this week that I'm not saying it's the most important, but I think the most underrated topic to study in a school setting, it could be high school, it could be university, is history. Because right now it looks like we're going to repeat the same mistakes of the Smoot-Hawley tariff fiasco.
And what was that?
Well, so when the beginning of the Great Depression, right? I mean, the 1929 stock crash led, of course, to a decrease in economic output. I mean, there was certainly a recession that had started. Now, and this is very fresh because Matthew Lau, and I told him so, not that I've ever met him, but I wrote that he's the best young writer in Canada on economic matters. I mean, he's read all the stuff. Anyway, he put out an excellent column yesterday in which he pointed out that unemployment following the crash had risen, I think, to 10.3%. But pretty shortly thereafter, it had dropped down to in the 6, right? So it was on its way down. But at that point, Mr. Smoot and Mr. Hawley thought that the government wasn't doing enough and introduced these very significant tariffs on, imported goods. And the countries around the world decided to retaliate. Dollar for dollar, apparently, just like we're planning to do. And that took, well, first of all, it made trades grind to a halt just about. And it turned what would have been a recession. And if we go by the recession of 1921, which nobody ever talks about because the president of the U.S. at the time had a stroke, I believe, was unable to do anything. The government, as a result, didn't do very much. The market was left to its own device. And within 18 months, everything was back to normal, right? But this time, they had an active president, and they decided to do things, including going ahead with these tariffs. Anyway, it took a recession, which, as I said, would likely have been short-lived, into a massive, the Great Depression, which lasted many, many, many years. And these tariffs were, and this is widely acknowledged among many economists, that it was not the right thing to do. So my post about history is that if you don't study history, in this case, economic history, chances are you're going to repeat mistakes because you don't learn from the past. And lo and behold, that's what we're doing.
Are there any important factors that you see in today's context that might be different from the previous context that maybe history won't reverberate the same way?
I mean, it's a good question because I think it's in many ways it's wide open, and I'm sure there are many, many elements that are different. But I would like to concentrate on the core, which pretty much regardless of what your reasons are, tariffs, tariffs are a sales tax on imports, right? I mean, people can try to justify them on all kinds of different grounds. I mean, some people would say, well, if you're going to tax people, a sales tax is better than an income tax. People would point to the fact that the U.S. around 1905 was pretty much, or up to that point, had been financed entirely out of tariffs, right? There was no income tax. And, there are many elements that contribute to an economy doing well, but the 1800s in the U.S. saw growth rates that we haven't seen, and unless things change drastically, we will not see again. But it was very much a free market allowed to operate. So people could say, well, but what I think people miss is that the size of government was so much smaller back then that, you could finance it. Like I'm not quite sure of the numbers, but if the government was, say, 5% of GDP, well, maybe it is possible to finance it through tariffs. But certainly in this country anyway, we're well north of 40%. The tariffs would have to be. Yeah. Now, as an aside, I want to point out to everybody who, wonders about, why libertarians advocate for smaller government. This entire mess right now that we're in, all of it has to do with government, right? Absence of government, or if the government was much smaller and unable to get involved in these things, people would be trading without, political consideration. You got something I want and I got something you want, let's trade. It would be so much simpler. This is all government driven. Another mess that government, anyway.
Maybe for everyone listening, Jacques, could you lay out what would be the Libertarian Party position on tariffs? I could pull up the Libertarian Party of Canada platform, but actually it doesn't mention tariffs. I know that you've been working behind the scenes on updating the platform. What kind of language should we see in the platform regarding tariffs?
Well, actually, I think if you look under free trade, that might be the better. But our position is extremely clear. We believe that free trade, and I'm talking here real free trade, not what passes for or is the misnomer of what we currently have, right? People talk about, like, I forget the new acronym, but let's talk about the old NAFTA, right? The NAFTA free trade agreement. Well, that NAFTA was never a free trade agreement. How can you call it a free trade when the document that governs it all goes on for thousands and thousands of pages? That's not free trade. That is managed trade, right? Because you have an exception here, you have a carve out over here, you have, all kinds of different things that again is managed. It's not free. So our position is very, very simple. Our borders are open. You want to sell us something, and there are people in Canada that want to buy it. Boom, that's done. Our free trade agreement would be a sentence, which is you're free to operate in Canada. To trade, and of course we would hope, for the opposite on the other side. So in this particular instance, we would not go, dollar for dollar. Now, one of the things that I've said, and I, if I were prime minister, and first of all, I should say, because I'm convinced that one of the elements that is driving this is the fact that Trudeau, like most people on the left, they are so quick to claim for themselves the moral high ground, which they then, having anointed themselves as, the good people, go on and on and on, lecturing others, telling the rest of us that we are either white supremacist or fascist, or, the usual slurs, right? It has nothing to do with the arguments. It's just a bunch of slurs. But Trudeau and his government have been, demonizing Trump. They've been criticizing him. And the point that I have made is that if you're the leader of a country, I mean, surely one of the elements is to act like a diplomat. You may think that this person or that person is terrible, but first of all, don't say this publicly. Keep your opinion to yourself, because in any negotiation, it's important to create some goodwill, right? Absence of, I mean, who would go into a negotiation with someone by starting out by calling them all kinds of names and how disgusting they are, or whatever? I mean, do you think you're actually going to get?
I find it interesting that that's what Donald Trump does, and he gets duly criticized for it. In fact, he gets criticized by Canadian politicians routinely because he's mean, and he says mean things, and he calls people dumb, and he says that's, and yet just this week, Chrystia Freeland has said that Donald Trump's policies are stupid. She has said that, and Mark Carney said that it's that these are dumb policies, and they're saying they're leveling the same accusations or ad hominem attacks against Donald Trump as they often criticize for him for doing. It's just a really crazy scenario that we're in Canada.
Yeah, but
and I agree with you. Like, why would anyone be willing to enter a negotiation and pretend that it's in good faith when the day before, Justin Trudeau had criticized the president of that country as dumb or stupid? It's not diplomacy.
Yes, exactly. But the hypocrisy, coming from the Liberals, I mean, I am so looking forward to Trudeau walking out, because although Carney, and we should have a few words about Carney before we leave tonight, because his performance over the last month, I'm absolutely convinced that he's Trudeau 2.0. I mean, he's been caught lying so many times already. It's very clear that he, like Trudeau, believes that he's the anointed one and that he's allowed to do anything. But anyway, just to get back to tariffs here, this idea that you start from the point of view that I'm the good guy and therefore pretty much anything I do is good. Let me start. Okay, so I am adamantly opposed to tariffs, but it goes both ways. I was looking it up today. The tariffs that Canada has had on dairy production in the US and eggs is not 25%. It's not 30%. It's not 50%. It's in the 3 digits in some cases. And then we discussed this actually on our Libertarian Lens with
cheese, 294% tariff.
Right. And it's 276 on American butter. Right now,
so these are the same politicians, Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau, that criticize the high grocery prices and the CEOs of corporate grocery stores and keeping grocery prices high. No, it's tariffs. It's 200. We could lower the price of cheese today by 294%.
Well, 290 points.
290 points. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the actuary.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it would be a reduction of about 3/4.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and butter, eggs, dairy, all dairy. It's across the board. We could lower grocery prices dramatically.
So I am not happy at all when I see all these Canadian politicians, going on about, what terrible idea these tariffs are. And they, but we do it, but it's okay, right? Because we're the good guys, and we have a good reason, and nobody apparently in Canada is willing to credit that Trump might have a good reason. I don't know if he does or not, but if you're going to say, hey, I've engaged in and continue to engage in extremely high tariffs, but it's okay because I'm protecting my dairy producers or whatever. Well, you can't just say, well, this guy's evil. I mean, quite frankly, there's a lot of Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, if you consider what he's doing right now with Doge and the massive fraud that he's founding, Elon Musk's finding. I mean, this can't be bad, right? To reduce the government, to undo fraud. I mean, but because it's Trump,
there's a lot of argument about his tactics and that it's mean to it's mean to fire people, and it's just happening too quickly, and they're not being understanding enough, and I've been seeing a lot of these comments in my circles. These are people that deal with change management and management consulting, and they're all very critical of saying this isn't good management. We should be better, and we should treat people with more respect. And maybe there's some truth to that. However, I'd like to remind people that government doesn't behave the same way that other corporations do in the free market. Government isn't subject to the market forces that prevent corruption, bankrupt the company if they go off the rails and aren't valuable in the marketplace. That government is financed by lethal force. Citizens are forced to pay taxes. If you don't pay taxes, there's imprisonment waiting for you. And if you resist arrest, there's lethal force waiting for you. And so government has grown with unchecked, without the common market forces that would normally shrink an organization or downsize an organization. And it's time. That's my opinion. It is time that a disruption take place, that it happen rapidly. And by the way, these people are getting great severances. I mean, they're getting, I've heard 8 months severance, sometimes longer. These people are being told, your job is no longer required. Here's a pile of money. Go find another way to contribute in society that doesn't cost the taxpayer. And they're given all kinds of opportunity to find another way to contribute to society. I'm in favor. The only thing that bothers me about DOGE is that their jurisdiction ends at the American border. And I wish they would find their way into Ottawa. Wouldn't that be great?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, like the stuff he's finding, and like if you think that in Canada we don't have massive amount of waste, if you think that every department is operating at peak efficiency, I mean, I personally, I'm telling you, it is unreal. I was asked, like, these are not audits, right? But verification from CRA about some of the deductions that I had. I provided them with all the documents in October. And then 3 weeks ago, I got one of those nasty letters saying that I had not provided the documents and that I owed them now so much money and with interest, and I needed to pay by March the 12th. Otherwise, something nasty was going to happen.
Yeah, so, they're ready with the threats. That's for sure.
And I was on the site, right? And I was taking a look, and it confirmed that all the documents had been uploaded, like documents received. That's what it is. I mean, on their own site, right? Yeah. So don't tell me you didn't get them. Your site tells me you did. So I phoned them, and the answer I got from the lady who confirmed, she said, yes, now I have to refer this to somebody, and it's likely to be looked at by the end of the week. Well, this was 3 weeks ago. I still haven't heard. But she said, well, errors, happen.
Yeah.
Right? So meanwhile,
3 weeks have passed, and what needs to happen is that some bureaucrat needs to look at their screen and confirm that the documents you said you provided were in fact provided, and then they need to check the box that says the documents were provided. I'm guessing at the procedure behind the scenes, and it probably looks something like that. And it would be a matter of seconds for a human to look and say, yes, the documents are here, but it's been 3 weeks. It's kind of crazy how inefficient our governments are. Jacques, I have
David, get this. When I phoned, okay, I was talking to about 2 different branches from the CRA. The first one was the one that does these kind of midi audits, if I can call them that, right? And then when she confirmed, yes, your documents are here, but she said, now the people who sent you the letter, right? Like these are reassessment,
Mhm.
and that's a different branch, and you need to talk to a different, like
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a
Anyways,
different branch.
we got some great comments here. The comment about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the people, because they, unfortunately, the writer makes a very good point. They don't have the clout to go in there and start firing people.
Yeah.
And even and I would say the other thing too is, and I don't know to what extent the U.S. have the same thing, but the Auditor General, right? I mean, I've said before, every year when they come out with their annual report, it's like a Stephen King novel for taxpayers, right?
Yes.
Because it's a horror story every single year, right? Massive amount of waste. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but we had an Auditor General by the name of Ferguson.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, he passed on. And I think he must have been, and I'm certainly not implying here that the government's reaction was contributing to his illness, but he was already looking pretty bad, and people asked him why. And he said, this year, whatever the year was, we went back to a department that we had audited 4 years ago, where we had all kinds of findings and, of course, all kinds of recommendations to make these findings go away. And he said there was not a single one that had been acted upon. And I'm convinced that this is par for the course. The whole thing about the Auditor General is that it makes the news for about a week.
Mhm.
They write recommendation and the government completely ignores them. Why? Because they can, right? They can get away with it.
Let me share with you. There are some people doing some interesting work in Canada. It's it's another Canadian Doge movement. This is called Canada Spends. I think I follow them at X, but they've also, I've discovered, have created a website, canadaspends.com, and they just highlight the kinds of things our government spends money on. Here's an example. Canada gave $5 million to help a for-profit company make more cheese curds in Quebec.
Yeah,
Canada
Saputo.
plans to spend $2.4 billion this year on IT services across government to digitally enable government programs. That's the equivalent of hiring 12,000 Waterloo software engineer graduates at $200,000 per year.
Yeah, or here's another one, like talk about inefficiency. Snarky points out that we have 8 times as many CRE employees as they do at the IRS in the US.
Per capita.
Yeah, per capita.
Yeah.
I mean, can you?
We have more CRA. We have a larger army of tax collectors than we have an army. We do. We have something like 58,000 tax collectors in CRA, and our military, the Canadian military across, naval, air, and land, is something like 53,000. It's really, really crazy. Hey, Jacques, I was thinking, would you like to look at some of what the other party leaders are saying?
Yeah, just before I go there,
Yeah.
again, just to finish this on inefficiency, we just had a provincial election in Ontario, and I ran as a candidate.
By the way. Yes.
Yeah. And I participated in 2 debates, and between the 2 of them, there was a single question about healthcare, which I thought was shocking, really. But I made the point in that debate because this is something that's coming from Sean Watley, past president of the OMA. And he said that Ontario has 10 times, not 10 more, 10 times as many health administrators per capita as they do in Germany. 10 times. Now, I know that the Teutonic reputation for efficiency is a well-earned one. But 10 times? I mean, we can't be half as smart as the Germans. I mean, in this case, 10th, right? Like, even if we were half as smart, I mean, like 5 times? Now,
Yeah.
I made the point that if I were the Premier of Ontario and someone presented that stats to me, I would have the next day a team on a plane to Germany to find out how they do things. But this has been...
Are you familiar with, Jacques, are you familiar with the concept called Parkinson's Law?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so Parkinson was an economist, and he's often quoted by people in my professional field because the statement goes like this. The summary of the law that he proposes is that the work will always expand to fit the available time. But actually what he was talking about as an economist was that the work hierarchy will always lead to bureaucratic bloat. Okay, the system of bureaucracy will always expand to fit the available imagination of the bureaucrats.
Right.
So he calculated that bureaucracy grows in normal corporations by a factor of like 6 or 8% per year. And it's even worse in government. And this is what has happened. And then there's a related principle called the Peter Principle. Are you familiar with this one?
Yes.
Could you describe that for listeners?
I'm familiar with it, but probably not enough to do a good job. So
I'll summarize it quickly in a nutshell. That there's a person named Peter, and he gets hired into a job that he's really well suited for, and he does the job so well that he gets a promotion. But now he's in a job that he's less suited for, but he learns and he gets better, and then he gets promoted into a job. Eventually he'll get promoted into a job that he's not suited for at all, and he's not motivated to learn, and then he's there. So Our government is filled with Peters. Just every job is filled with someone who was promoted into that position because they were better at a other job, and now they're here. They're not succeeding. They're not growing any further. They're just stuck at this spot. They're not suited for the job. They're incompetent in this job, but they're not going to get demoted.
Right.
They're not going to get let go.
Yeah, and I recall now that one of the follow-up to this is that once they get promoted to a point where they are not competent, they spend most of their time trying to cover their backsides because they do recognize that they're not competent. So they don't even do the work that they're not qualified for.
And they surround themselves with people who won't hold them accountable. So this is where nepotism becomes a problem, because they'll hire their friends and they'll hire people who they know they're safe with. There's a lack of accountability, and yeah, this is certainly happening. I have on my screen, I have an example of some of the things that the other party leaders have published lately. These are kinds of things like, so here's Maxime Bernier of the PPC. He's talking about the tariffs. Because for those of you tuning in, we're talking about tariffs. I know we're kind of taking a bird walk through other topics, but generally the reason that Jacques and I are together today is because he wanted to talk about tariffs. Here's Maxime Bernier. Fact: I'm the only politician in Canada who did not react like a drama queen to Trump's tariffs. I understand economics, and it doesn't want to impose new taxes on Canadians and impoverish them in order to reach an agreement with Trump. He's wrong, though. He's not the only politician. You have also not acted like a drama queen. You understand economics, and you don't want to impose new taxes on Canadians.
In fact, I'm assuming it's Mr. Guggenmos for MP. He had a very nice shout out to me on X, pointing that out. In fact, getting back to Maxime and say, that's not true at all. There's another guy,
There's another party here. with
Okay,
similar.
David, just before I forget, before we
Yeah,
go to the clips, there's one thing I wanted to say because
sure.
I wanted to just finish on this tariff stuff. That not only do we not have tariffs, but I want to point out, two things. First of all, I would sit down, like if I were PM,
Hmm.
I would sit down with Trump, and I would point out to him that in every facet of life, we have to trade in all aspects, right? And I would say, just like if I want something that you have now. Now the thing is with money. Money, I think, confuses a bit people. But money is a store of value among other properties, which means that when I work, then I get money, and it's easier for me to, like, instead of me going to a grocery store and say, "Can I have some bread?" and in return, I'm going to provide you with some actuarial services. I mean, you can see how difficult and cumbersome that would be, right? So money makes it a lot easier. But the fact remains that in some way I have treated my labor for theirs. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing among countries. You can only pay for your imports through exports. And that's what I would get across to Trump. We're not going to retaliate, but I simply want to point out to you that we won't be able to get as many of your imports if we can't pay them with exports, right? I mean, if you're stopping my exports by natural process, I won't be able to get your imports to the same degree as before, right? And I think, like, even Trudeau had to admit the other day, or I think he said he was quoting the Wall Street Journal that he never agrees with, but agreed with this time, that Donald's is a very smart guy, but he's doing a dumb thing type thing. Well, in this case, I would say, um, I do believe he's smart, and I think he would understand and come to reason. Now, the other thing I also want to point out is that a lot of these things, they take time to resolve, but you cannot escape reality. I will give you an example, I think, to drive the point. You know that for years, uh, the viewpoint of the West, or certainly in the US, is that to fight communism, you had to go to Vietnam to fight it there because it was better to fight the communists on their ground than on our beaches, that type of stuff.
Hmm.
But if people had understood the inherent problems in communism, they would have, I mean, in a way, it amounts to letting people have enough rope to hang themselves, right?
Mm.
Because why did we end up really soundly, and we, I mean the West, soundly beating the Soviet Union, is because their economy was absolutely terrible, right? Now, if you're a politician and you understand economics and you say this is bound for failure, we're just going to let them hang themselves because in the meantime, we are going to do well. We're not going to start wasting lives and fighting people in Vietnam and things of that nature. And look at Vietnam today.
Hmm.
It's a mostly free market country. It's not a communist country. So
They're adamantly resisting the pressure of communist China, in fact.
yes, and my point is sometimes unfortunately, you have to give it time because in the
Mm.
meantime, you're going to make it worse. Like I would think that the entire Cold War era was enormously costly, and lives were lost, and what have you. And to me, it's the same principle here. Yes, tariffs are a terrible idea from both sides, and if you give it enough time, people are going to rise and say, you know what, you are hurting me with your political machinations.
I think your point is well made about the hypothetical conversation that you would have with the current president in the United States. You might describe this problem of tariffs and hope that he sees. But actually, I'd like to point out that I don't think you'd even be having that conversation with him because a Libertarian Party would do much more to dismantle supply management. We would ask ourselves questions like, why is it that American banks can't freely operate in our economy? We would ask ourselves, why do we have 294% tariff already on cheese? And we would remove that. And so the current problem and the current strife between the two countries would be alleviated because a Libertarian Party policy would, I think, match the economic objectives of the United States, which is to have a strong economy throughout North America, strong security. We've talked about border security in previous conversations and the fentanyl problem. And I don't think you'd be having that conversation with Donald Trump.
No, I think many of the irritants, which we refuse to acknowledge, would indeed be gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
but if you were in conversation with Donald Trump, would you cry? I have a clip here of Justin Trudeau crying.
I know.
Can we show it?
Sure.
Okay, let's get to this. It's just unbelievably weird. So I hope that the audio works. I'm going to show the clip. I'm going to clear up the screen a little bit so everyone can see the video bigger. And here, so this was a clip that you commented about. You said on X, you said Trudeau has lived in a fantasy over the last 9 years. Everything he's done has been to his benefit at the expense of that of Canadians. The well-being of Canadians was never close to being his priority. And we can see that in the current economy and all the data. Every stat that matters, every metric that matters shows that he has failed this country. Here's a teary-eyed Trudeau. Here we go.
Because in the past, on a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future. Because in the past few weeks, we've been working with our provincial and territorial partners to make sure that families can rely on this system, not just for years to come, but will allow this system to lock in, to become something that no government, a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, could ever go back on. On a personal level,
give this man an Oscar
every single day.
But David, I must admit, I must have been taken too much by the tears to notice the last third of this clip. I mean, what is he talking about? Like a system to lock in so that no future government will be able to undo? I mean, what's he? I mean, this is dangerous.
insane.
Like, it's basically saying that 4 years from now, or maybe a year from now, if we have another government that clearly expressing the will of the people and they want to change things, like this is
what he's admitting to is he's admitting to stacking the Senate and stacking the Supreme Court and putting in place structures that are very difficult to undo, so that his vision of the Canadian future will be supported by all of the Canadian democratic institutions. Like, I think that's what he's talking about, or he's talking about something even more insidious, which is perhaps new electoral regulations or laws that prevent future governments from undoing his ridiculous policies. I don't know. It's dangerous. But you're right. It's a good point.
It's once again, it goes back to this self-anointing. Like he's such a self-righteous. I cannot wait for him to be out of there. I mean, this idea that I know best and future governments or future Canadians, can't change what I've done. I mean, this guy is delusional and is dictatorial as well.
Yeah, dictatorial for sure. I think what he's literally saying is future governments shouldn't have the power to undo my great ideas.
Yeah, well, but there are no great ideas.
They're all bad. Let's find out what I couldn't find a good sort of quote from the leader of the bloc, but I do have Chrystia Freeland here in a brief interchange on MSNBC. And would you like to tune into the crazy stuff that she's saying?
Well, I do enjoy being spoken to like I'm a 5-year-old on a regular basis. So
Okay,
put her
here
on.
we go. Here we go. I hope the audio is working. So here's Chrystia Freeland talking to the former press secretary of the Biden administration on MSNBC.
When you do think about Canada, you might think, oh, they're smaller than us. Is this really something I should be worried about? Well, the stock market is worried. Shares have gone down, and this has been a terrible year for U.S. stocks already because of these tariff threats. And the reality is, you guys need us. We are your largest market by far. The U.S. sells more to Canada than to China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. So we do have leverage. And as Prime Minister, I will use it. And not because I want to. I mean, the irony about this, the stupidity about this is right now.
There's that word, right?
Yep.
So they criticized Donald Trump for being mean and saying mean things and calling people stupid. But here she is.
We
Anyway.
have a balanced and mutually beneficial relationship. There is a win-win here. There is an exit ramp. But Americans need to know that if you hit Canada, we will hit back, and we will be sure that our retaliation hurts.
These are the words of a lady who just days ago said that she would align with the United Kingdom and other European nations to prepare our nuclear arsenal. I wish I could find that clip. I should look that up.
But the thing is, well, I think what she said is mostly true. The fact is, the percentage of our GDP that is dependent on trade is much, much greater than that of the US. And so from that perspective, we have more to lose than they do. So that's a different way to look at this.
Yeah. If there's any hope here, it's that the comments that follow this.
By the way, I would like to welcome
post.
Libertarian friends from Minnesota.
There we
Welcome
go.
to the the podcast.
Yeah, I agree. I am shocked how eager it seems that leaders of major nations on this planet are willing to jump towards World War III. The Macron in France has just talked about aligning all of the Europeans towards fighting Russia on behalf of Ukraine. I mean, there's World War on the what's that? What's what they called, the doomsday clock? Like where are we? Like we're at half a second from doomsday. It's crazy. I have a clip here of Jagmeet Singh. You want to see it?
Well, not really, but go for it.
Okay. Breaking. Jagmeet Singh says that because we're in an emergency, now is not the time for an election. Are you surprised he's going to prop up the Liberal Party again? Of course he is. He says laws must be passed and implemented first and an election second. Jagmeet Singh is the biggest slimeball POS in the history of Canadian politics. This comes to us from government.exe is corrupt. And let's listen to the clip.
Impacted. And then the measures in terms of...
Oh, sorry, that's not the beginning of the clip. Here's the beginning of the clip.
You want to vote down the government at your earliest opportunity. Do you still stand by that statement, and do you think now is the time for an election?
Now is the time to put workers first. We need supports for workers first, put in place working, and an election afterwards.
This tariff war could go on for 4 years. So how long would these measures that you're suggesting go on for, and how are we paying for it?
So the employment insurance should be permanent changes to the employment insurance that cover workers when they're impacted. And then the measures in terms of the economic stimulus, we need it immediately. We need a short-term fix. And as we move towards building a more resilient economy, we can look at ways to adjust it.
Do you see this legislation, or if it would require?
You want to comment on anything so far? There's another roughly 45 seconds.
I don't know who the journalist was who asked, like, what if this goes on for 4 years? I mean, that was an excellent question, which, of course, he didn't answer properly. I mean, the fact is, you cannot, like in his world, in Singh's world, yes, you can do this because he's not connected to reality at all, right? You can print money and, do what they did during COVID with no impact whatsoever. Of course, it's complete nonsense, and COVID, I think, showed with flying colors what a terrible thing it was in terms of what they did, right? And he's asking for more of the same. So he didn't answer the question, even though it was an excellent one.
So read between the lines here. He's talking about permanent changes to EI. And so they've announced that there's an indefinite EI now for workers affected by these tariffs. This is universal basic income. And also notice he's talking about workers, and he's doing that in the socialist sense, which are government workers, union workers, people who are generally covered by EI. He's not talking about me, who runs an independent business. He's not talking about you, who is, retired, semi-retired. He's not talking about the normal working independent business person in this country, or the employees at the restaurants or service industry. He's talking about unionized workers.
Yeah.
Workers in the Marxist sense, in the strictest Marxist sense.
No, I'm laughing because Gogan just posted the real reason why he doesn't want an election anymore, right? Let me translate Singh here. The NDP numbers are bad, so I want to avoid an election. And it's true. Their polling numbers are just in the toilet right now.
But anything but conservative, right?
Yeah.
Elizabeth May, NDP, they will do anything just to prevent a conservative government. And it's crazy because more than half of the voters are conservative. The Conservative Party has won the popular vote in the past 3 elections, or 2 at least.
David, I have to repeat this, right? They are self-righteous people who have claimed for themselves the moral high ground. The rest of us who are not, and I'm not a conservative, but I'm certainly a non-left-wing nut job, and therefore my policies are bad. Everything I do is bad. You're a bad person. Every conservative voter is a bad person. I mean, it's infantile, right? Because we don't argue policies. Like, in fact, it's so the whole thing is so weird that just yesterday on X, somebody was looking at the conservative, I think, 5-step platform to deal with, like Canada First, right? And it's retaliatory strikes. Retaliatory tariff, dollar for dollar. Like 4 of the condition, and the guy said, I can't tell them apart from the Liberals. So,
that's partly because the Liberal Party has basically taken Pierre Poilievre's ideas. Cut the GST on new homes. Break down trade barriers between provinces. Like these were all things that Pierre Poilievre has been saying for 18 years. But all of a sudden, they're now part of the Liberal Party candidate leadership race. And we can't tell them apart anymore. I mean, I take the person's point, but I think they're being a little uncharitable about the fact that the Conservative Party has been pretty consistent on these points. The Liberal Party is new to these positions. But here, let's continue.
Pirate legislation receive royal assent before you'd be comfortable going to an election? You just see it become law or pass through the Senate and return back?
Yeah, I don't want just a lip service. I want protections in place for workers, passed and implemented, helping out people. We literally have a dire situation. 25% tariffs on our country
isn't even as much as the tariffs we impose on our own country through the current carbon pricing, carbon tax?
Will mean potentially hundreds and thousands of workers lose their jobs.
So if the 25% tariff from the United States will cause 100,000 jobs lost in Canada, why aren't we being truthful about the economic devastation that the carbon tax is having on jobs in Canada?
Yeah.
So to Canadians listening, my commitment to you is I promise I'm going to fight to protect your jobs. I promise I'm going to fight to make sure workers impacted get help. And I promise that I'm going to put in place supports that I can do so that people who are worried about the cost of living that's already so high going up, I'm going to fight to make sure life is more affordable.
We don't want them to
Okay.
do any of that. We just want them to promise to uphold democracy and allow an election to happen.
Let me point out what a buffoon this man is, because I don't know if you noticed the contradiction, right? We're going to lose, I don't know, he said hundreds of thousands of jobs. And then he said, I'm going to fight to keep your job or to defend your job or something, right? So on one hand, you're going to lose your job. On the second, on the other hand, I'll be there to protect your job. I mean,
Yeah.
these are promises that he cannot keep. I mean, unfortunately, if someone loses a job because their employer's got to let them go because they're not selling as much in the US as they used to, there is nothing that Singh can do. Nothing. Other than, and I don't know if this is a good segue here, but again, a plug to Matthew Lau. Matthew pointed out in an excellent column yesterday, and he was, I don't think, I mean, he was, he's an honest guy, and he was basically summarizing the work that Milton Friedman and somebody else had done about, you remember that San Francisco had a terrible earthquake that turned to a fire, I think in 1906. And it turns out that something like 75% of dwellings disappeared. 75%. This was in April. The first time the newspaper put out a copy after this disaster was late May. In the late May edition, there was not a single reference to people being homeless. So the point that Milton Friedman made was that, and the government was almost completely absent back then, right? So this was the free market at work. And
Sure.
it was, things like a 40% increase in dwelling density. Like, in other words, people start taking people as renters or whatever. There were temporary shelters that were established very, very quickly. I mean, the point that he was making, and we see this over and over again, is that if we let the free market operate, it's going to solve way more problems than the government ever could. So when Singh made these idiotic thing about saving your job or whatever, no, he can't. But what he could do, if he were to prop up a government that wanted to eliminate or drastically reduce red tape, bureaucracy, taxation. I mean, you're talking about carbon tax, but income tax has to come down as well. Government spending has to be reduced massively. If we did this, we would be able to soak up the jobs lost in no time at all, in a way that would actually shock these people. But remember, Singh, Trudeau, Carney, all of these people, they do not believe in the free market. They don't. And one of the reasons why they don't is that they cannot, even if they do, they cannot admit that it works. Because the minute you admit it, you are talked yourself out of a job. Which is why, like, if I were to become prime minister, I would have very little to do. Because I do not believe in central planning. I do not believe that I would have to start handing out grants and special loans for EV vehicle. I will let the market work. And that's the fundamental difference between me and those clowns.
Agreed. We've had some great comments. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I'm feeling like maybe what we wanted to say has been said, or is there something else you want to close with?
Somebody reminded me in an earlier comment, of course, and I think you mentioned it as well. these interprovincial barriers,
Yep.
right? Again, you know, it's these people, they dug forward and all, like they're such a bunch of hypocrites because
Yeah.
this was not an issue. People had been talking about this for a long time, trying to get movement on it, adamantly refused to do anything. But now suddenly, oh my goodness, these things are terrible. We got to do something, right? I mean, where were you when people were pointing this out? And by the way, I also want to add something because there's an element that's kind of funny. Well, I would like to insert a bit of levity here. But someone was pointing out that these interprovincial barriers, in some cases, are not barriers in the sense that Ontario says to a Manitoba worker, because those are true, right? Like if you are an electrician in Manitoba, you're not allowed to quote for a job in Ontario and you know, things of that nature. But in some cases, it's not so much because we prevent somebody, it's because we have between the provinces, many different regulations.
Yes.
And I'll give you one that is absolutely silly, where you wonder, why do we need someone in government to regulate these things? But do you know that in Ontario, in certain circumstances, a toilet seat has to have an opening at the front, right? Like so it's not a completely closed oval. There's a gap in the front, whereas in Alberta they don't care. Now,
Albertans are smarter.
well they are.
This is evidence, I think.
Right. But my point is, in what kind of demented world
Yeah.
do you think that you need to have somebody
Regulate
dictate the shape of a toilet seat? I mean, shouldn't this be left to the market, like where people, the demand would dictate what you would produce? Anyway, the result of this is that there are people, because of these different rules, and this is just one among many, they will not come to Ontario because they don't have the means in a cheap way anyway to meet the local requirements, right? So they will limit themselves to a province where they can provide the good or the service.
Yeah, this happens all the time. We know also that some provinces don't allow certain contractors to enter and do work in their province because of we have. I've moved plenty of times in my life, too many times in my life, and I can tell you with no doubt and absolute confidence, it is easier to move from Canada into the United States than it is to move from one province to another province.
Really?
Yes, the paperwork involved, the costs that are involved. Like I've moved across Canada a number of times from Saskatchewan to Alberta, Alberta to Ontario, Ontario back to Alberta. Every time I've had to move, the costs and the bureaucracy is really extreme. They penalize you to. Oh, you've moved across the border, so now you have to pay provincial sales tax on the car that you already owned for 3 years, or you have to pay for. I moved into Ontario and I owned a Toyota Prius, and I was forced to pay for an environmental inspection on the car.
Wow!
It's a Prius. It was a brand new Prius, it was like 10 months old. And I had to pay the government of Ontario or whatever. I had to pay a local service station $600 or whatever to do the inspection, and you know that of course they're going to find something, and then you have to fix it, and so it's like it's such a racket.
Yeah.
And all I did was move across the provincial border. So Paul says good content this evening. Hey, thanks, Paul. Really appreciate everyone tuning in, and I think we should close it on that note. Is there any sign for optimism, Jacques? Can we end on some optimism?
Well, if you're patient enough, you know, reality has a way to getting getting back at you. And at some point, I think reality will set in, and people will recognize that they're on a path that's unsustainable. Now,
Let's hope.
I want to leave with a quick shout out. It was earlier this week, I think, announced that there's going to be a by-election in Halifax.
Yes.
If we don't go to a general election before, anybody who's listening, who's a Libertarian in the Halifax region, please consider running under our banner, our beautiful blue and yellow banner.
That's right. And we should also add that we have a lot of great Libertarian provincial candidates in Ontario that put their name forward. You were one of them in the recent election there. And we've got some wonderful people that are putting their names forward for the pending federal election. So candidates, please check out the X feed and the Facebook group. You can see all of the candidates that have put their names forward. We're publishing their portraits and a little biography and the riding that they're in, so that you know that you might find someone in your riding to support in the next election. We're accepting applications from potential candidates. So if you're interested in putting your name forward, and it could be as little as you get 100 signatures and you put your name on the ballot. Or you can go further than that and get involved with debates, maybe campaign, maybe do some door knocking. That level of commitment is entirely up to you. But I really just thank all of the people that have put their names forward and started that effort already.
Well said, David.
Thank you, Jacques, for a nice conversation this evening. Everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, and send it to a friend. Tickle the algorithm, do some commenting, and then do some commenting again, and make sure that algorithm is duly tickled. So thanks very much. Have a great night.
Yeah, thank you for the engagement. Thank you.